Hello. Today we are going to discuss wealth building. I think this is one of the most important things you can know to take control of your life, and I think you can separate it into stages. So, for that reason, this video is going to be an overview of wealth building, and we're going to equate it actually to gaming terms. We're just going to kind of put them in some fun categories that relate to gaming because I think that's a good analogy for wealth building. They're actually based on a lot of the same principles. And I'm just going to go step by step through the ones that on each tier, and then in future videos, going to explain each tier out a little bit more. But hopefully, this one will be very helpful for anybody that is trying to build wealth in your life, which should basically be everybody, because kind of wealth equals freedom in the world that we've set up. Okay, so let's begin. So in the absolute first start of wealth building, we're just going to be going from, you literally have no money to the absolute end game of wealth building. And we're going to call this the start of the game. Okay, so this is the start of the game. You have $0. And moreover, not only do you have $0, you are trading time for money. Okay, which is basically a dollar per hour conversion, right? So everybody starts here, and the feasible amount that you can make is dependent on your state and your government. Basically, it's whatever your minimum wage is. So that might be anywhere between like 12 to honestly like 10 to like to $20 an hour or whatever. And this is where you start. This is where everybody starts. Okay, unless you're very lucky. So we're gonna assume everybody starts here, and this the way that you leverage this tier is, and this is kind of all going to come together as you see each tier develop. Okay, and this is what I went through personally, and I'll kind of share my personal experience with these a little bit and like where I went with these things. So you're trading time for money. The way that you increase your dollar per hour value is you increase the amount you earn via education, certificates, and negotiation. Okay, so at if you come into the game at $15 an hour on your first job, you're and I should say also experience. Okay, if you come into the game at $15 an hour, the way that you want to start thinking about things is you want to start thinking about, okay, how can I increase my dollars per hour so that they are the most valuable possible? So if I'm earning $15 now, double the amount of money that I would earn working the same amount of hours would be $30 an hour. What would it take for me to get to $30 an hour? And there could be several answers dependent on your field of expertise. It used to be college, right? That's what everybody would say. But if you think about college, it's actually one of the worst investments that you can make. There are other reasons to go to college, but it's one of the worst investments you can make purely to increase your dollars per hour, because you are spending 4 years trying to get a degree that says that you are worth more money. And maybe you're spending longer than that, because often with like master's degrees and PhDs where their dollars per hour value can scale, it's going to be a lot more than that. So that said, I'm a very big fan of certificates. I'm a very big fan of volunteer experience. I'm a fan of doing things within the field of expertise. There's also content creation, like writing and becoming an expert on those particular fields that can increase your dollar per hour value outside of the scope of going to like college or making a massive investment in like a year-long course or something. You really can put anything on a resume, and a lot of people at this tier don't realize that you can really increase your dollars per hour almost immediately by doing just a couple of hours a day of something on your off time, whether it be like a certificate or some kind of volunteer work. Like if you're a computer programmer, for example, you can put something up on GitHub. You can build your resume by building programs within your expertise that show your experience and then act as leverage points on your negotiation or on resumes. A lot of people don't think like this. Negotiation is always good. I mean, some of you may be able to go to your employer and immediately request a salary increase simply because you haven't done it, or because you believe that you haven't got a salary increase in a while and your work is extraordinary compared to what you're getting paid. So there's negotiation often goes a very long way. And that's the start. There's a lot more to talk about here, but I could get stuck in the weeds on basically all of these subjects. So I'm going to just keep moving on because this is an overview video. All right. So early game is you are a high income earner because you mastered the start. Okay. So at this point, you've increased your dollars per hour to the point where you're a high income earner, but you're still trading time for money. Okay. So your step here, and the way you increase at this tier is diversification. I don't know why this is a weird word, of investments into stocks, assets, Minor real estate, maybe like your first home, cryptocurrency, etc. Or we could just like high risk investments. Okay, so at this tier, you are earning a high amount of money, and most people never pass through the early game. Unfortunately, they don't get past like level 15. Okay, out of a 60th level scale. They you become a high income earner because you've leveraged one of these things aforementioned, but then you maybe buy a house, and that house will probably do quite well for you. You do some stocks and cryptocurrency, but high income earners that pass into the next tier, which we're going to call the mid game, are people who consistently diversify their assets into asset classes that are earning them returns. And the people who do not pass into this tier, it's important to talk about them as much as it is the people that do succeed, because far more people don't succeed, are people who have people who fail here have lifestyle inflation. So lifestyle inflation is when your income goes up and your expenses go up in proportion to your income. This happens to a ton of people, and like it happens most of all because people are like, it's not going to happen to me. And everybody thinks that, but it actually happens to everybody. So what happens when your income goes up is the people you hang out with also are high income earners. The price of things goes up, right? You live in more expensive areas, like you might be in Seattle, for example, or San Francisco, or somewhere where state income tax is eating you and you don't like get it. And then you're also spending more money because your cost of living is higher because you're in a job. You've earned yourself into a job through doing your start work that puts you in a higher profile place. So for example, right, if I was in the early game, I'm in Seattle right now, and I pay $2,700 for rent. And one of the big decisions, I'm way past the early game, but one of the big decisions I've made this year is I'm moving to either Texas or Nevada, so I can save quite a bit of money, like I'd say 30 to 50% of my cost of living expenses in that place. Now, why would I make that decision when I'm financially free? I don't have any particular need to do that, right? I could maintain in Seattle quite fine because I am aware of this lifestyle inflation problem, even at later tiers. Lifestyle inflation has no end, so even in the end game, you can spend enough money to get out of any tier, right? And put yourself right back to level 1. So lifestyle inflation is really scary. That's the thing that people lose out on here. People who pass this tier are people who invest consistently in stocks, assets, and things like that, and they invest it as a percentage of their income, a high percentage of their income. So they save like 50 or 60% of the total money they earn, and they put that back into like asset classes, and they'll end up passing to the mid game, which at this point means the big difference between the early game and the mid game is you're trading time for money here in the early game. So again, most people do not pass the early game, right? Because at this point, consistent monthly income or saved income allows you to leave the race, like leave the rat race, right? Trading time equals money. Okay, and that's what that does. So that's really the big difference between the mid game and the early game. The actual net worth that you might have is sort of like insubstantial. So like some people can do this because they just have $3,000 a month coming in from a solid source that they can rely on, and that's all they want, and then they're done. They're in the mid game. They don't have to work another job. Okay. Some people are have just gotten through investments. In my case, I skipped a couple of tiers, and because I sold a couple companies, I was able to get into the mid game by having a large amount of saved cash. So at that point, I did also diversify, and I continue to diversify via investments, but investments have been a small amount of my returns personally compared to the amount I have gotten off of selling businesses, which I'll talk about in a minute. So at the point of mid game, people who progress here are people who work on equity building and asset building projects. So remember, don't attach these tiers to greater amounts of net worth, right? You might have something in your life that allows you to work on these projects without having any income. It could be a sugar daddy, could be your parents, it could be that you're sitting on a huge amount of trust. It could be that you have very low expenses and you only need to work a couple of hours a month because you're in like a software job where no one pays attention to you. It could be whatever, right? Some people, they get lucky, right? And they can skip these two tiers and they can go right to the mid game, because the only thing that keeps you out of the mid game is your expenses. Most people are not lucky enough, which is why I start with these two tiers, to have low expenses or have their expenses paid for. So they have to sit in this place and earn enough money and become high income earners until they get here. But if you, for some reason, are in the mid game and you don't have to worry about your income and your expenses, well, then your next step is going to be building equity based and asset based projects. So what do I mean by that as an overview? Equity projects are things that you own interest in that you can later sell to someone else for extraordinary value, right? So, for example, when I owned Counterlogic Gaming, I had a percentage of equity ownership in that with my business partner George. And when we sold that company, Madison Square Garden traded me for that equity, and they paid me very nicely for that, right? Enough that I escaped all the way into like the mid late game. Okay, and that happened because I spent 3 or 4 years building that company, taking a very small salary, similar to what I'm doing now at Novo, right? And building something that is an equity building project. Now, you can also build asset building projects. And so what's an asset building project example? Something like consistently investing in real estate, buying homes, loaning them out through favorable bank terms, and then having them appreciate in value, fixing them up, and generating consistent income from tenants or Airbnb. Also, what's another example of this is buying small-scale cash flow businesses. So looking at businesses like a cafe or something, or a laundromat, or any kind of company, and seeing that those put off some cash flow, owning those businesses and running them. This is how you escape the mid game, those things will generate enough consistent monthly income to put you into what we would call the mid to late game. This is where I personally am, so I know a lot about this because I'm thinking about it a ton. And this is you've reached a point where you are not concerned about finances or expenses, and you have several assets generating cash flow, right? Okay, so mid to late game, the way that you succeed at this point is you sell equity and asset building projects. You trade work in for massive returns at the end of that work. So Novo Inc., my creative agency, is a 10 million plus business. Conservatively, that I started from zero with my co-founder Matt, that I own 50% of the company in. So if I sold it today, I'd walk with somewhere north of a few $1 million. And if I sell it later, it'll be worth a lot more than that because I'm building turnkey solutions that will end up increasing the valuation of the company. So your concern in the mid to late game is, and this could be one thing, it could also be 10 things, it could be whatever you want. You are trying to make a big play. And there are many different ways to do this. Like you could buy a building of like a tenant building of like 40 or 50 apartments. They could generate cash flow for you, and then you could sell that building for an extra like 1 or 2 mil because it just appreciates in value in a good area. You could just buy a cash flow business and then or start a cash flow business and then end up developing automated and turnkey solutions that increase the valuation of that company somewhere in tech or whatever. A lot of choices, right? So when you're in the mid to late game, you're thinking about, how do I make very big plays in the businesses that I have personal ownership in, right? That I can then leverage to get a unbelievable return, right? You hear of some people that are selling businesses for like $100 million or $500 million, whatever. I don't put too much stock into those kind of goals. I think a lot of people overestimate the amount of money that they need and underestimate the amount of work it takes to get to those ultra high net worth levels of wealth. Like if you want to be like a $50 million plus player, you've got to give up everything in your life to do that, right? But if you want to be a $5 million player, where your total net worth is like 5 million and appreciated and mostly diversified, you can like do that like on the same amount of time that a person spends on a 9 to 5, and you'll be just as happy. The difference between like running at like 10 million net worth, like 50 million net worth, like 100 million net worth is like pretty negligible, unless you have really weird goals. And the mid to late game is just concerned with like more like fun at this point. Is like I'm building Novo because I love being in the creative agency world, the marketing world. I think it gives me unique insights into like the behavior of like human beings, and then simultaneously, it's going to be a very high value asset at some point that I can either hold on to or I can sell some percentage of, right? To take those returns and then go into something else that I might be interested in at that point, which is when I would sell it, right? I'd sell it at the point where I want to go. Probably in my case, I'm looking at the end game, and that is you buy, improve, and trade major asset classes and businesses. So this is like you're owning real estate complexes. You're owning like apartment complexes, 100 to 200 like tenants. You're buying like you might own like 80 or 90 properties that you have a management company that's like lending stuff out, or you're at the head of a massive corporation that you own equity in that's generated like $1 billion of revenue, or you are buying, selling, and trading businesses that are putting off like huge amounts of returns. Right. This is the end game. I'm still like pretty young, so I don't know like what I'll be interested in or if I'll be interested in this, because like you can check out like after this, like you can check out at any one of these points. I mean, hell, most people check out in here, right, and then they retire, and it just comes down to your personal happiness. So like, unlike a massively multiplayer game, like you don't have to get to max level, right? Well, actually, much like a massively multiplayer game, a lot of people quit before they hit max level. Maybe the game's not for them. Maybe it takes too much time to get to max level. The grinding is it's too grindy, right? People don't like the grindy games. Well, guess what? Like you've never seen a grind like these tiers, right? And I love this analogy so much for the gaming thing because it's something to think about when you are getting into this. You may not want to put in for the grind, and for a lot of people ending up in the mid game or even in like the early game where you just are making a ton of income and you're diversifying it and you know you're going to be done in like 10 years is perfectly fine, right? This is not a scale of success. That's something to you really have to understand. And if you're one of those people who like thinks you need to get here to be happy, I hope you're listening to this video so that I can knock you out of that thought train, because that's not true, right? Like I'm not I'm in mid to late game. I'm not a better person or necessarily a happier person than anybody at start or early game, right? All that stuff is ascertained by your own personal goals. I like building cool shit and I don't like listening to people, so I work in the mid to mid late game because that makes me happy, right? And I know that like that's the only key that I have, because I can walk over to Amazon and my qualifications will get me, a $500K a year job there. But I will then leave 2 weeks later when whatever VP I'm under, inevitably I get into a shouting match with and I throw his desk, right? Because I just can't deal with it. So I know I have to be in these like self-owned like equity building assets because that's the gear that I have, right? You have to make those sort of introspective assessments for yourself. But I have no interest in particularly ending like mid-late or end game, 100 million net worth or 50 million net worth or whatever. I know that doesn't lead to my happiness to like, buy, sell, and trade islands and shit. And it probably doesn't lead to yours either. Like the things you have to keep in mind is like, okay, to what do I really want to do with my life, and to what level of income am I comfortable with? Most people, $10,000 a month. I mean, earning like 120 a year in a decent COL like place, like, man, you're gonna be fine. Like you're gonna be really happy, be able to support a family, take care of stuff, and buy things that are, you can reasonably want. If you want more for some reason, then you just have to keep in mind that after this point, after the mid game, you're trading time for money in a different way. That the amount of expertise you need, the amount of knowledge that you have to have, and the amount of just pure grind it takes to like build a startup or something like that is formidable. And you have to have the blood for that, because if you don't, you you're just gonna fail and have a rough time, right? Yeah. So also, I think there's people that can skip tiers, right, for various different reasons. So for some people, I mean, you start at as a founder of a business at like 20. This is happening more and more, right? Or maybe it's just kind of media that's like highlighting these people. You start a business at like 20, you sell it for millions of dollars. You're in the mid to late game right away, like you never had a job, right? Or there are people that like are now earning income in like more esoteric ways, like through cryptocurrency APR investments and stuff like that. So there are so many ways to think about these different tiers, and that is why I want to break them down by like each respective one, because I have so many ideas within this. Like there's also ways to kind of integrate tiers. and like, but you could call this multi-classing kind of. I just made that up on the fly, but I think it's really cool. Where like you could be in the mid game and the early game, like for example, by doing like what do they call them, garage sales and shit, and where you go out, you buy items and sell them, and then you make like $400 or $500 a week, right? On weekends, and then you come back to your normal job until maybe you can quit that and get into the mid game, right? There are lots of things to do. So future videos will discuss those topics, but for now, that's an overview of how to build wealth and how to kind of think about it. And hopefully you can use this rubric to sort of apply it to your own life as I have. And thanks a lot for watching. And if you have any comments, leave them below. Thanks.